Hello, hello, and welcome to class. Welcome to class. Welcome to English language class, and it's good to have you here again. So, we have been looking at the topic synonyms, antonyms, and context. And one thing that we have been mentioning is that you cannot do without context when you talk about synonyms and you talk about antonyms. Right. Okay. So before you can correctly or appropriately choose the synonym of a particular word, that means you must have put context in place. Without context, you cannot. You won't be able to appropriately choose the correct word, the correct synonym, or the correct antonym of a particular. All right, so today will be the last class on synonym and antonym, and that means that by the next class we are moving to a new topic. All right, so for like 4 classes now, we've been talking on synonyms and antonyms. All right, and today we continue synonyms and antonyms. But before we continue for today's class, let's quickly do a revision of what we did in the last class. All right, what we did in the last class, and still on context, synonyms and antonyms. Um, we were able to talk about how to easily determine the meaning of difficult words, how to easily determine the meaning of difficult words. And like I mentioned in the last class and the last before the last class, I said I gave 5 tricks or 5 tips, as you may call it. And the first one is to break the words into smaller parts. Breaking the words into smaller parts, that means that there's some big words that you can break into smaller parts. That means the word have prefixes, they have roots, they have suffixes, and by breaking them down, you may be able to determine the meaning of that word. Then the second one is to use context clues. This means that the words around it, you have to study them carefully, and then you would be able to understand better what the word is. The word you're looking for, its meaning, the synonym or the antonym, you're going to be able to get what the meaning is. Then the third trick or the third tip is to use word substitution. Yeah, word substitution. That means you try to replace a difficult word with another word. All right. You usually have options. So from that option, you try to replace the difficult word you're looking for its meaning. You try to replace it with a simpler word so that you can choose the correct or the appropriate synonym or the antonym of that word. Then the fourth one is to look for familiar words inside the word. That means that inside a big word, there could be a familiar or a smaller word inside that big word, and that smaller word is something that you are familiar with. So from that familiar word, you are able to get the meaning of that big word. Then finally, we looked at thinking of opposite words. Thinking of opposite words. And this is when I explained that if a sentence shows contrast, the meaning of a difficult word may be the opposite of a familiar word. So in sentences like this, you have to look for contrast or contrasting words like but, unlike, however, instead, on the other hand, etc for you to be able to determine the meaning of the word. So if you miss this class, you can go on YouTube to get you can go on our YouTube to see what we did or to have more details about this. So today, like I mentioned, it's the last class on synonyms and antonyms before we move to the next topic. All right. So today we are looking at common synonyms and antonyms mistakes. Common synonym and antonym mistake. All right, so we're going to have to use our board this minute. All right, so yes, this is an English language class, and we're still dealing with synonyms and antonyms. All right, so English language, and of course, we're looking at common synonym and antonym mistakes. Okay, all right, so we're going to be looking at some points that would help us understand the mistakes that you could make with synonyms and antonyms, especially when you have to choose words that are relating to another or the opposite of another. All right, we have been looking at context, and again, I'm saying and mentioning that you cannot do without context in synonyms and antonyms. All right, so we've been able to look at how you can easily determine the meaning of words when it comes to synonyms and antonyms. Today, we're going to be looking at some mistakes, some common mistakes that could make it difficult to get the appropriate answer when choosing synonyms or antonyms of word. And the first thing we are going to be looking at is confusing similar but not identical synonyms. All right, I'm going to be having that on the board so we can all see that. All right. Okay, so confusing similar but not identical synonyms. All right, so you get the word similar but not identical. That means this word they probably look alike, but then you can use them interchangeably. All right, so I'm trying to get the note on the board so that we can all see it. All right, so if I would explain this so you can perfectly understand it, like I mentioned, there's some words that look identical or they look similar, but you cannot use them interchangeably. And the simple answer to this is just context. All right. So um, let's have this on the board so that we can all see it. Okay. All right. All right. All right. All right. So confusing, similar, but not identical synonyms. So, like I said, some words may seem interchangeable, but they carry different meanings or connotations. So using them incorrectly can change the meaning of a sentence. All right, that means that one word, of course, when you look at a word, or we all know this, that when you open a dictionary and you look at a word, the word may have like two different meanings, sometimes three meanings, sometimes you won't find a word that has up to like 10 meanings. Okay, so when you see these words, you look at the synonyms of those words and you find you find like three synonyms. It doesn't mean that all the synonyms can be used interchangeably, because of course you find context again. Context help you determine when you should use a word and when you should not use a word. So the fact that a word has like two synonyms does not mean that you can use the two synonyms interchangeably for a particular context. So we're going to be looking at some examples under this. And all right, so we have the example of big versus large, big versus large, big versus large. All right, these words are synonymous, right? Of course, you can have, or you can have um, the synonym of big to be large, depending on context. Context will help you perfectly determine when you should use this word, right? But then you cannot use them interchangeably because they just look similar, they are not identical. So, example, we have big versus large. And we have this example, you can say she had a big amount of money, which is wrong. But if you say she had a large amount of money, that's right, because large is used with uncountable nouns like amount. So you can't say big amount of money. Now, if you find in your options, maybe for your exams, you find you're supposed to choose a word, and then you do not understand the context. You may not know that there are some things that are not quantifiable. There are some words that, for instance, now you use the word large. Large is usually used for size in general, size in general, and then maybe for quantifiable amount of things, things that you can count or things that you can measure. All right, but then you can't say big, because big in itself is is a general description. It's used for a general description. All right, so large, since you can count money, all right, however large it is, you can count money, it will be more appropriate to say large instead of big. But in this case, both big and large are synonymous. They are synonymous normally, but when you put them in context, big is not right for this context, large is right for this context. So, for this reason, you know that some words are similar, some words are synonymous, but they cannot be used interchangeably. So, by using interchangeably, it means that you cannot substitute one for another. You cannot say she has a big amount of money when you should say she has a large amount of money. That is what we mean by confusing similar but not identical synonyms. Now we move to the next point, and our next point is choosing the wrong degree of meaning. Do not forget that we are looking at common mistakes when choosing synonym and antonym. So when you are choosing your options in exam, you need to look out for some common mistakes, some mistakes that could help you choose the inappropriate words. So make sure you avoid these mistakes. That's why we are looking at them. All right. So like I said, choosing the wrong degree of meaning, choosing the wrong degree of meaning. All right, so we can have space. I hope we can all catch what's on the board already. We're going to have to wipe this off so we can have the next point for it. All right, so like I mentioned, the next point is choosing the wrong degree of meaning. Choosing the wrong degree of meaning. So, just like I explained earlier, synonyms cannot be used interchangeably because of context. Context will not allow you use synonyms interchangeably. There are some synonyms that maybe you can substitute them, but they're in rare cases. But most times you cannot substitute one synonym for another because of context. Context will help the meaning differ. All right. So in this case, choosing the wrong degree of meaning, it means that synonyms have different levels of intensity. So sometimes when you need to use a strong word, if you use a weak word, the sentence will not carry the meaning it should. When you need to use a weak word and you decide to use a strong word, the sentence would also not carry the meaning it should. So the sentence in itself will be incorrect. So when you talk about degree, you're talking about the levels of intensity. That means you can use a word that is either too strong or too weak as synonym. For synonym, you need to use the perfect word to get or to pass across the meaning that you are trying to pass across. All right. So when you choose the wrong degree of meaning, just know that you are doing the wrong thing and it's a common mistake. All right. So let's have an example, and we can use the words angry and furious. Angry and furious. Let's have that on the board so we can see that. Angry and furious. All right, now these words are synonymous, but the intensity is different. All right, the intensity is different. Furious is stronger of a word than angry. Now look at the sentence. She was furious when she forgot her pen. I mean, Furious is too strong for this kind of a sentence. Of course, you need to look at context. Context will help you know that furious is too strong a word. All right, she was furious. She just forgot her pen. Why should she be furious? She could be annoyed. Annoyed is milder. Annoyed is the perfect one again. So you can say that angry or annoyed as the mild version of furious, even though both can be used interchangeably. All right, you know that both of them, both angry and furious, or maybe annoyed and furious, can be used as synonyms for the word mad. The word mad is coming up again. All right, they can be used as synonyms for the word mad, but you cannot use them interchangeably because their intensities are different. So she was furious, furious for you have when you talk about being furious, you're talking about something or a situation that is strong, or that is strong, very strong. All right, so you always have to consider the intensity of the synonym you used. Do not make the mistake of using too weak word or too strong a word, because in your options for your exam, you could find stuff like this. You see a milder word and you see a strong word. Context will help you determine whether you should choose the mild word or the strong word. All right. So the third point that we are looking at is misusing synonyms um, in formal and informal context. Misusing synonyms. So just like we have intensity, we have settings too. We have settings, all right? And in settings, you could have formal setting and you could have informal setting. I'm sure you're familiar with the word formal and informal because, of course, when you're asked to write like a formal letter to someone, you know that, okay, this is like an official matter and I have to be serious. There are some words that I cannot use, even though maybe I know this person, but since it is an official matter, I cannot say some things or I cannot discuss some things in this letter. But when you talk about informal, you know that, okay, this person is my person, this person is my guy, and I can use some words for this person, and this person is not going to be angry. All right. So just in that case for formal and informal, when you talk about synonyms, there are some synonyms that you can use for formal context, and there are some synonyms that you can use for informal context. You would be making a mistake if you're supposed to use a formal synonym in a context, but you decide to use an informal synonym. So you could make the mistake of misusing synonyms in formal and in informal context. So for a formal context, you need to use formal synonyms, and for informal context, you need to use informal synonyms. So we can have an example, all right? We can have an example, and I have a few examples here, but because of our time, we just use um we use one. All right, let's use the example of put off versus postpone. Put off versus postpone. These words are synonymous, all right? But again, because words are synonymous doesn't mean that you can use them interchangeably. Your context, do not ever forget context for any reason. Context will save you from mistakes such as this. All right. So we have put off versus postpone. Put off is informal, what postpone is formal. Now look at these sentences. The meeting was put off to next Monday. The meeting was put off to next Monday. Now, when you talk about put off, you can mean something like putting something aside till when you're ready for it. But that phrase in itself isn't formal and you can't use it because this is like for a professional use. So if you say the meeting was put off, you're not using the right word in this context. But if you say the meeting was postponed to the next meeting or to next Monday, postpone in this form is correct because it is the formal term. All right. Now look at another one. We postponed the exam due to the weather. All right. We postponed the exam due to the weather. This is formal. Look at the second one. Let's put off the trip until next week. Let's put off the trip until next week. You will see that some contexts are formal, some are informal. You need, like I mentioned, the tip you need to use is that once a context once a context is formal, you need to use formal synonym. And once a context is informal, you need to use informal synonym. All right. So in this case, you use postpone in professional, official, or academic setting, and then you use words like put off in everyday speech or informal setting. All right. I'm going to have to wipe this off now so we can get to the next point. The next point. All right. This is point 4, and this is false synonyms. False false synonyms. All right. Okay. So in this case, some words look similar, but they do not have the same meaning. They do not have the same meaning at all. They just look similar, but they do not have the same meaning. So I'm going to have to wipe this off so that we can have the next point on. All right. I hope we grasped that already. Okay. So we're looking at false synonym as the next point. False synonym as the next point. All right. So words that seem similar but are not. So some words look similar but they do not have the same meaning. For instance, we have the word economical versus economic. Economical versus economic. If you're not careful, you can misuse this word. So if you say the country's economical growth is impressive, that's wrong because economical only looks like economy. All right. So when you talk about economic, it relates to the economy, basically. But when you say the country's economic growth is impressive, that's correct because it relates to the economy. While economical for the first sentence means saving money. All right. So you have these words that look alike: economical, economic, and you have to be careful so that you do not choose the wrong word as your option. Another example that we could have here is historic and historical. Historic and historical. They look alike, and sometimes some people even misuse them, but they are not the same. So one has to be very careful in choosing these words so that you do not make the mistake of putting one word for another, even though they do not mean the same thing. All right. So the next point we have is choosing a word that is too general or too specific. Choosing a word that is too general or too specific. All right. For synonyms, already we know that words have different meanings. All right. So there's some synonyms for a particular word. One will capture everything you want it to, and there are some other words that will not really capture everything. So it means that there are some words that are general in themselves, and there are some words that are specific. And there's sometimes that context determine or context wants you to have a general word, or sometimes context wants you to use specific words. So if you use specific words when you're supposed to use general words, you would be wrong, even though the words are synonymous. All right. Let's have this point on the board so that we can see it. All right. Choosing a word that is too general or too specific. All right. So here I said a synonym should match the exact meaning of the word, not just a general idea. Now look at the word speak versus whisper. Speak versus whisper. I hope we know that the word whisper is a form of speaking. All right. While speaking is general, whisper is specific because it means to speak very softly. When you say speak, speaking in general just means like, okay, just talk. However way you want to talk, just talk. But when you say whisper, whisper means, or whisper is a kind of speaking. Okay, so to speak very softly is to whisper, which is more specific, or the more specific form for the general one speak. All right. So when you say he whispered, looking at this example, he whispered to the audience during his presentation, you would know that this is wrong. How would someone whisper to the audience when he's presenting? Context will tell you that this is wrong. Even though whisper is a form of speaking, and even though whisper and speak are synonymous, you cannot use them interchangeably because context here determines that whisper and speak are not the same for this context. All right. So when you say he spoke to the audience during his presentation, this is right. Speak here is general. So if you see a word that speaks more general, or a context that determines a general meaning, then you go for the general meaning instead of the specific meaning. And there's some times that you have to choose a specific meaning instead of a general meaning. All right. So one of such examples is to use the word move versus crawl. Move versus crawl. Right. Let me just write that here. Move versus crawl. Now, this is general and this is specific. Crawling is a kind of movement. All right. So if you have an example like the baby moved on the floor, the baby moved on the floor, that is too general. How did the baby move on the floor? All right. Moving is just like to change position, which is very general. But when you use the word crawl, the baby crawled on the floor. That's very specific, describing the exact action of the baby. So when, even though crawling and moving could be synonymous, you cannot use them interchangeably because context determines that you do not use them interchangeably. All right, we move to the next point, and that's like choosing a word. Or okay, that's the sixth point, and the sixth point is mistaking negative words for positive words. Mistaking negative words for positive words. All right, so there are some words that actually sound positive, but they are negative, and there are some words that sound negative, but they are positive. All right, because of space, I'm not sure this space would really contain it, so I'm going to have to wipe this off now so we can have the next point. All right, so mistaking negative word for positive word and vice versa. All right, there's some words that they are positive but they look negative, and there's some other words that look negative, but they are positive. All right. So mistaking negative word for positive word and vice versa. So, like I said, some words sound positive, but they are negative, and vice versa. For example, inflammable versus flammable. Some people think that inflammable is the opposite of flammable, whereas they actually mean the same thing. All right. So if you say the substance is inflammable, so it is safe to use, that's incorrect because inflammable is negative and means to catch fire easily. All right. So the substance is flammable, so it is dangerous to use. That's correct because it also means to catch fire easily. So sometimes you see words like this and then you think you can use them as synonym and antonym. Whereas this word, even though the inflammable look as if it is a negative word, or it's the opposite, the antonym of the word flammable, this is not actually right because they actually mean the same thing. This is what we mean by mistaking negative words for positive words. So you need to be familiar with your words to know the exact word to use, or the exact synonym, the appropriate one to use for your word. All right. And then lastly, under this point, is falling for tricky answer choices. Falling for tricky answer choices. Okay, so I'm going to have that on the board. We'll be rounding off soon. All right. Okay, so falling for tricky answer choices. So, like I've been mentioning since the start of the class, you would find answers that will confuse you. Sometimes you will think that you know a particular answer, while in the real sense, you don't know it because you are confused already. Sometimes you think that you've seen an answer, but you've not seen the answer, because by the time you look at another option, you are seeing another answer that looks better than it. These are the tricks they use so that you can get confused. But once you understand that these are tricks, then you would be able to find your way around it. So, falling for tricky answer choices. So, exam often include tricky options that look correct but are slightly wrong. For example, let's use the word generous and stingy. When you say the word generous, generous means willing to give or share. Willing to give or share. While stingy means unwilling to share. All right. Now, if you're asked to choose the opposite of generous, and then you have a word like selfish, like greedy, like stingy, like unkind, and then you are looking at these options like, okay, of course, these answers look, you would know right away that there are some answers that are definitely not options, but there are some times that you just get confused. Okay, you talk about generous, could it be selfish or could it be stingy? All right, because I already gave the meanings of this word, you are, I'm sure you already know what the answer is. The answer here is stingy, but some people may confuse it for selfish. All right, so selfish in itself is actually related, but it doesn't directly mean unwilling to give. It doesn't mean unwilling to give. All right, so these kind of tricks are usually something that you need to determine how you choose your words, so that you do not fall for their own trap, because definitely exams are traps like this, especially once it comes to English. You find like two answers that look alike, and two answers that you know that, okay, these ones, they are definitely not the ones. So you need these tricks to be able to determine what you are going for. All right, so we have come to the end of the class. Let's quickly look at one past question, UTME past question, and this is from 2019. 2019. All right, so all the questions that I give to you, once I mention the year, just go ahead and look for the session for nearest in meaning or opposite in meaning. You will find these questions there, and as much as possible, kindly go over them and see the ones you can, using all the tips that we have talked about in class. All right, so this is from 2019, and it says choose the one nearest in meaning to the words in brackets. All right, so the word we have is derogatory. All right, so the sentence says Okibe was rusticated for his derogatory remark about the principal. All right, so we have options as complimentary, unwarranted, lackluster, unsavory. And then the first thing you want to look at is context. You look at context. So again, do not forget, there are some tips that you can use to help you determine the meaning of a word. In this case, if we use context clue, we did this in one of our classes already, context clue. You can look at the words, all right? You look at rusticated, you know that this is a negative meaning and it's a remark, derogatory remark. It means Okibe made a derogatory remark, or Okibe made a remark about the principal and he was rusticated for it. That means it has to be something terrible. It has to be something terrible. Already you know that it's not complimentary. Okay. It's not complimentary because complimentary sounds too positive. Okay. So the word rusticated here is a strong context clue to help you determine that what he did was actually wrong. Complimentary means expressing praise or approval, which is not what we want. Unwarranted means something that is uncalled for, not justified. You talk about lackluster, like lacking vitality and energy, you know that this is not it. Then you look at unsavory and then you're like, okay, this is unpleasant or morally offensive. Okay, so you already know that the word derogatory refer to a remark that is disrespectful, which actually led to him being rusticated. All right, so your answer here is unsavory. Do not forget there are two things that we looked at to choose our answer. We looked at context clue from one of the things that we've learned in our previous classes, and then we have looked at what um, we have we also have today. So again, like I mentioned, 2019 UTME English language, you find this there. All right. So please do well to go. If you do not have the past questions at copy, of course you can always use the CBT on the app, this app that you're using for the class A1 tutor, A1 tutor. All right. So if you miss any part of the class, kindly go to our YouTube channel at A1 Tutor and see what we have done so far. So today we have come to the end of the class and we looked at common synonyms and antonym mistake, and we mentioned 7 points that could definitely help you, or that would help you avoid mistakes. And one of it is confusing similar but not identical synonyms. The second is choosing the wrong degree of meaning. The third is misusing synonyms in formal and informal context. The fourth is using false synonyms. The fifth is choosing a word that is too general or too specific. The sixth is mistaking negative words for positive words, and vice versa. The seventh is falling for tricky answer choices. All right, so I'll see you in the next class. That will be tomorrow, and then we'll be going to a newer topic. All right, so prepare for the next class. That should be physics in about 10 minutes from now. All right, see you in the next class. Bye bye.